Welcome back, fellow shop rats. Today we're going to discuss 4 things that you can do that will help you to improve your fabrication skills. Remember that the things that we do here on the channel just aren't about the specific cars that we work on, like this 70 Forsyth Duster or the 70 Stitches Challenger or the 47 Ford, but it's stuff that you can apply directly to the projects that you're working on. Remember that fabrication is something that you grow in. It's not something that you start out doing perfectly. And we just wanted to do another episode here in our series that's called Fabrication That Doesn't Suck. Remember, how do you do fabrication that doesn't suck? Well, you start out by doing fabrication that does suck, and you keep doing it until it sucks less, and eventually it doesn't suck at all. Now, I'm going to clarify this. I am not a fabricator. I'm just a guy who fabricates. So while I always know what I'm doing, that doesn't mean that it's always the right way. My channel is about sharing with you how I do things. There are plenty of other experts out there you can learn from who know a whole lot more than me. I'm just an average guy with some average tools doing some average work. And you can do this too. All right, let's watch the show intro so you get an overview of all the projects that we work on here. Get a little better feel for what this channel is all about, and we'll see you on the other side. I'm Mike, and this is My Car Shop.
Working out of a 100-year-old refurbished barn, bringing 35 years of experience to projects considered beyond repair. Vision, creativity, and problem solving are essential tools in this place. Watch as we transform junk into polished metal miracles. This is My Car's Shop.
As I said, we're going to go right back to the basics. We're going to talk about cutting metal. We're going to talk about welding metal. We're going to talk about grinding metal. And we're going to talk about bending metal. And I've got this scrap here that we're going to start with, and we'll do a cut. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about metal thicknesses, all the different things that I use, and just kind of give you in 30 minutes or so a good overview of my approach to the basic things about sheet metal without using the bead roller and the shrinker stretcher and the sheet metal brake and all of that stuff. Way back to the basics in the beginning. This is just an old piece of scrap of 18 gauge that I happen to pull out from underneath the workbench and where I keep my scrap metal. And we're just going to go ahead and make a cut here and talk about cutting metal. But I want to talk about metal thickness as a precursor to that. It's always better to use, especially when you're first starting, use metal that's a little bit heavier than what you might think you would use. So most cars are, sheet metal on the cars are around 20 gauge, give or take. And when you're first starting to do fabrication, I would suggest working with 18 gauge. It's a little bit harder to bend, but you get a lot more forgiveness. When you get down into 20, and I don't really use 22 gauge metal anymore, when you get down into 20 gauge metal, you don't have as much forgiveness because that metal's pretty thin, and when you're grinding on it, you can really get through it quick and end up with problems. So I picked a piece of 18 gauge to start with here because it's a good example of things that I would do when I would first start working with sheet metal. Another thing to be sure to use is do not use galvanized metal. Use cold rolled. I wouldn't even use hot rolled. I would use cold rolled. It's just a little bit better to work with. And you don't have to deal with all the treatment and so forth that goes into the galvanizing because you got to take all that off and paint doesn't stick. And well, just use cold rolled steel. All right, let's make a cut here and we'll talk about the cutting techniques. I have a plasma cutter and I have various tools for cutting. I have all the special tin snips, straight snips, right snips, left snips. But one thing that I do a lot is just use a cutoff wheel like this with a thin disc. And one mistake that people make when they're cutting is they tend to get right down in like this and try to cut a straight line all the way across in one cut. That's fine if you're making a straight line, but when you do that, it's easy to walk off. And what I always suggest, as you've watched many of my episodes, if you've watched the work that I do, is go across it lightly and just kind of walk where you can see where you're going. Now, we got to clean this metal up before we get started, but watch where you're going. The nice thing about this is you're setting a scribe line that the further you go, the more that this cutoff disc is going to fall right back into that channel. The second thing you can do when you're doing that is you can cut curves like this. And so you come along and you put a line down and you follow that curvature like that, and then you come back and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you can cut yourself a nice curve. If you're hogging down in like this, you cannot cut a curve, because what's happening is you have so much of this cutoff wheel engaged into that metal like this, there's no room to wiggle, and you'll snap this disc off and end up hurting yourself. So I'm going to clean this metal up, we'll get it cut off, and then we'll demonstrate a couple of cuts for you. Another thing that just happened here I want to mention as a safety. When I was cleaning this piece of metal up here, this thing hit the floor, hit right on the edge of this disc. Don't even chance it. Throw it out. It ain't worth it for $1.50 or $3 or $5 or whatever these things cost. It's not worth the risk. Take it off, throw it away, get a new one. Okay, so as I was saying, if I needed to cut this curve, the thing I'm going to do is take my cutoff wheel and just track along this line like this and create myself a channel. The other thing is have your metal clamped down so you're not chasing it all over the place. I forgot to grab a clamp, but I'll do that. But get it clamped down. Make sure your clamps are out of the way so that it's held good. I've got a bunch of steel to make a steel top welding bench, and you can actually weld stuff to the top of the bench. That's a great way to go. I don't have that built yet. I'll get to it here soon, but I'm just waiting for a little nicer weather so I can clear a bunch of cars out of here and make some room to work on things like that. In the meantime, we keep hammering on the projects, but we'll get some clamps, clamp this down, and I'll demonstrate this cut. Many of you have seen me do this 1,000 times, but I've not focused specifically on how to do it, and I thought that was a good place to start here in this episode. So again, we're going to get our hand position right, kind of have ourselves held down and come around and just follow that contour. So we'll do it slowly. So now you can see I made 2 passes. I've got a little channel here that the grinding wheel goes down into, and we'll just keep doing that. I'm not putting any down pressure on this, just basically the weight of the grinder and letting it track. Once I've made the first initial mark, it's good to go, and we'll just kind of let it go, and I keep going one direction only. Some guys like to go back and forth. I have a hard time seeing when I'm coming back this way because the sparks are shooting this direction and it's covering up where I'm headed. So I prefer to just always have the sparks behind and see clearly where I'm going. You can see I do a straight line across here. I'll do the same thing. I don't want to hog down real hard on it. I just want to go back and forth. Once you get that channel set up, then you can go ahead and cut it through. Like so many other things, foot position matters. If you're standing in front of it like this, you don't have good foot position. You want to get yourself kind of, it's a lot like shooting in many ways if you're familiar with shooting. Get yourself in a good position. If you can get your hands to where they're anchored down. In this case I don't have them anchored down, but I'm going to go ahead and move this over so I get a little better hand anchor position. Might as well while I can. Now I can rest my hand here. Some guys say rest your forearms. I can do that. It depends on what I'm doing. Welding, I try to rest my forearms more so my hands are free. But in cutting, I find that just letting it walk like this back, I'm not going to pull it back, but go like this makes the difference. Just having a hand position, using it as a guide, you can see how. And the other thing is, while you're doing this, don't feel like you need to cut as soon as you draw the line. Get a feel for what's comfortable. You know, if I've got to cut in a weird position, get your body in the place that makes the most sense to you, where you feel the most comfortable, because you're going to get a more accurate cut that way. If you watched in that time lapse, hopefully I got it slow enough so you can see it. I wandered off 1 second, and that's fine. Just stop, come back, get back in your groove, and continue on where you belong. It's not that hard. Okay, I think we've covered cutting pretty well. Let's go on to welding. Well, I went ahead and cut this piece so we have something we can weld together. And we can bring this together here and start the process of tacking that together. Now, the first things about welding is make sure your metal's really good and clean. The second thing about welding is make sure that everything is held down real well. So I'll pull this over to the edge of the bench here, like so that I can clamp it down real good and hopefully get things in a decent position here. The other thing is I can use magnets, which I'll probably actually use in this case. The goal in this case, because we're doing a butt weld, is to get those two pieces of metal so you really can't feel an edge. So I was using a couple magnets and I got it clamped, and we'll put our welding clamp over here, and then we'll go through and start running a couple tack welds and start moving things around where we want them to be. So we've got our ground hooked up there, it's clamped to the bench, and we've got space to go in here and weld. Now when I'm welding 18 gauge, I always tend to run my welder hot. I'm always on the verge of burning through. Go back to hand position again. Find yourself, well, foot position first. Find yourself a good stance where you're comfortable. In this case, I'm going to use this to just hold my hand, and I'll be able to put a couple of spots in here like this. Not a lot, just enough to get these panels stuck together. It looks good. Now we'll go over here and do a couple. Okay, we're going to back off our clamp because it's in the way. I don't want to completely remove it from the equation here yet, because this end could do this down here. Okay, that's pretty good. We'll go ahead and put one more tack down here now, making sure that I'm still flush about the toilet. It's good. Now we'll move this one here. Okay, we've got it tacked. Feels pretty good. No warpage or anything. How hard are we? Yeah, we're pretty warm. That could cool some more. You'd be amazed in just those 6 welds how much heat is there. I can't hold my hand against that. And the rule of thumb is, if it's too hot for you to hold your hand against, you shouldn't weld anymore. Now again, by experience with this thickness of metal, I might push that in a real world production environment, but for the demonstration we're doing here, I'm going to try to stick to the rules as much as I can. So we're going to let that cool a little bit. And the other thing is, if we had a big piece of metal underneath that, That would operate as a heat sink. Right now the wood underneath is really holding the heat. So I may see about getting a piece of metal to put underneath there to help draw that heat away. We'll be able to expedite our process a little bit. All right, I found a piece of 16 gauge and I went ahead and tacked it down just because we could. It's not perfectly flat, but for demonstration purposes, it's going to be okay. That gives us a nice surface to work on to put this together. So we'll go ahead now. It's cool to the touch. It's not flexing at all. So we'll go ahead and add a few more spots, then let it cool down till I can do this again. Add a few more spots till I can do this again. So this bench here, which has a wooden top, is going to have a plate on the top. This plate right here, which is almost like, it's over a 1/4 inch. So can't remember how thick that is. It's not half, but it's pretty darn thick. That is going to take a lot to get that heated up. So that's what we're going to be using for our welding surface on top of that bench. I know some guys will use an air gun to cool that down, or a damp cloth. Like I said, I would push this harder normally, but that's just by experience. I'm showing you how to do it the right way. Once you gain the experience, then you can go ahead and start learning how to cut corners. Trying to show you this in real time as much as possible so you get an idea of the time frame of this. So we'll start in the middle. Missed that one, didn't I? Okay, we burned through a little there. That's good for demonstration. That was more my aim was off than anything. I can see this piece of metal is starting to do this a little bit, which means we got a lot of heat in it, so we got to let it cool down. Okay, by the time I got the camera over here, it has already settled down, but it was what I call seagulling. So it's a thing, and something to be aware of. But you can see now we got, I think I put 6 more tacks in there. I burnt through a little teeny bit right there. It's still pretty warm. We'll let it cool down. We'll come back and do 6 or 8 more. All right, cool to the touch again. My camera was dying, so I had to go get an extra battery pack. And by the time I got back here, 3 minutes. It's cool to the touch. Okay, got it done again. It was starting to seagull, especially in the middle. Still is a little bit, if you can see it or not. Just wait for it to cool down until it's cool to the touch, and we'll go back through and connect more dots. All right, so I went one more time. I didn't show you, but I went through and just filled in the last little spots. It's all nice and cool to the touch. So I'm comfortable with that. There may be a few spots we're going to need to go back in and fill in. I see one there maybe I missed. But we're going to go ahead and grind this down now. To do that best, we would also want to flip that over and weld it on the other side. I'm not going to take the time to do that, but I will say if you're going to do a flat piece like that and you want it to turn out really well, before you grind, flip it over, run it down the other side the same way, and then you'll have to grind both sides, but it'll be well worth it. It'll be a super strong bond. So basically what I'm showing you here, at this point, cut it loose, flip it, tack weld it on the same thing, like 6-8 different sessions of tack welding to get it all beaded in. Let it cool between each one, and then you can start grinding on the other side, get it ground down close, flip it, grind it, etc. So just lather, rinse, and repeat on what I'm showing you here. I don't want to be too redundant. Now, I need to change my DeWalt over to a grinding disc first, and that's where we'll get started with a stone, and then we'll go down from there and we'll show you the processes of grinding. Remember that in grinding, it's the same thing as welding. You don't want to put too much heat into it. You can warp it, so you want to be careful. You can get away with a little bit more heat now that it's welded because that's a fairly strong union, but you still have to be careful. You don't want to warp that metal. Remember, ears and eyes, ears and eyes. Okay, let's go ahead and start grinding now. And what we're going to do is take the grinder and just come across the top and take the high spots off of the welds. We're not intending to grind it completely down. We're just taking the high spots off.
You'll notice as I'm grinding that I'm skipping around on the surface. I'm trying to be careful not to allow the heat to build up too much in any one place.
Let that cool down, lather, rinse, and repeat. Cool to the touch again. Probably this will be the last time with this stone. Once we've got that accomplished, put a brand new stone or a brand new grinding disc on my 8-inch. Keep our speeds down so we're not putting much heat, and I'm still focusing on the weld itself. So we'll get this down to 3 or 4. Starting to feel like the weld is worn down enough now that we can start actually working on blending the whole thing together. Got a little hot right there on myself, like a dummy. Wasn't paying attention, it was a little high and it kept rising. But that's okay, let it cool down, she'll sink back down in. See that little hot spot right there, but I did take a hammer and tap that gently. It went right back down after I cooled it. So one more grind with this and then we'll move on to another grinder. So we're getting there. Now we're going to go down to same grit, but a disc that's already somewhat worn on a little smaller grinder. But it's nice and flat. It's got just a this teeny bit of wow right there. It's not bad. This piece of metal was not exactly perfectly flat anyway when I started, but it's good. So I got my little pneumatic grinder here now. We'll go over it with that. This is one of those same discs, but it's worn some. It's a little bit smaller, but we'll be able to work that out a little nicer. Nice and cool, no problems. A little bubble right there. We'll just dolly that down just a smosh and we'll be fine. I normally wouldn't go this far, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and go over this with an 80 grit on my DA. A little warm right there. Feel it starting to buckle up a little bit, but it's fine. Okay, turning out good. It's just the slightest little bit of a valley right there. You can hardly feel it. And again, I'm going further than I normally would just to show you how far you can go. Go over that with the purple wheel now and you'll be amazed at what that looks like. Purple wheel. There we go. We're going to go over it with one more time with the DA with some lighter grit paper, and then we're going to call it good there. Again, I'm going further for demonstration purposes just to show you how good it can look. That purple wheel does tend to put some heat in, so you have to be careful, but looks really good. Normally we'd like to go to like a 120, but all I have is 220, so. And you can see what we got. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is bending. Normally I have a couple of nice big 1/4 inch pieces, rectangular, about this big, that I put in this vise to do this. I can't find them, they're around here somewhere. I thought they were under this bench and I dug through everything down there and they're not there, so I'll come up with those later. But anyway, I just wanted to show you for bending. Let's suppose that we want to, well, for some reason we need to bend a flange right across here. So we're going to go ahead and draw a line and then just use these 2 pieces of angle iron to demonstrate how to do that. So we've got our line in there. Of course I have a sheet metal brake I can do this in, but I didn't have that until a year ago. So this is how I would bend everything. I just put it right down in there to the line, tighten her down, make sure that my 2 pieces are fairly level to each other. And then I would do it by hand part of the way. And then once it's come over part way, I would take my hammer. My good hammer broke, unfortunately, but now I've got a nice 90-degree in there. Looks good. Understand there's been no block sanding. There's been no filler put on that. That's just done the way it was done. It's got just the slightest little teeny bit of warpage over there, but the metal wasn't perfect to start with. But I would say that it's very likely that I did that because I didn't weld it on both sides anyway. So am I happy with that? Absolutely. Now, a couple things I want to explain here. First of all, bending is pretty simple. You can make some really nice bends very simply. It's not rocket science, just by using a couple pieces of metal and a hammer. Remember to keep your ball peen hammers and so forth separate. Get yourself a cheap set of body hammers and use them exclusively for body work so you don't mar the faces up. A couple pieces of metal work real good. You can bend all kinds of compound angles and stuff like that. We could spend a ton more time doing that. I still use that process. I think we just used it the other day on something on the Challenger because my sheet metal brake is not a finger brake and we could not bend something in the middle like that, for example. If this was to be flat from here over and this was to be bent, it would take a finger brake for that, and I don't have one of those, so I use the vise method to do that. Getting my early fingerprints all over my nice clean primer. Shame on me. Overall, not bad. Remember that MIG welds are harder than TIG welds, so TIG welding this together would have been a little bit less heat, a little bit easier to grind, but I can't complain at all. There was just this one little bubble on the end here. We didn't weld it on the backside, like I said, so it tended to want to pull just a little teeny bit. You can see it's got a little bit of a curve to it, but you get the idea. That was mainly what this was for, was demonstrating. 99% of the time, I don't take my welds that far. I don't take my grinding that far. As you've seen in the back seat of stitches, I'll show you. Half the welds I don't even touch. You know what? It's under a seat. Who cares? Especially in a project like stitches, which has got its name from stitch welding things together. I don't care that welds show. And quite frankly, I kind of like the look of a nice weld. So yeah, I could grind them all down, but you know, not grinding the weld means things are a lot stronger than if you ground them. So there you go. This was a fun little thing. Spent a few hours out here with you today and just demonstrating these techniques. Drop those questions down there. Anything that I didn't answer or anything you're unclear about, I tried to go into as much detail for you as possible on how I do these things. Like I said, I'm not a fabricator. I do a lot of fabricating, but I will not claim that title. I'm not formally trained in any of this. This is just what I do. So I always know what I'm doing. I just don't know that it's necessarily the right way. I'm only sharing my way. So don't learn just from me. Go over and see Fitzy Fabrication. If you want to learn from a master, go over there, see Matt at Iron Trap Garage, or check out Gene Winfield or one of these guys that have been doing this stuff a lot higher end than what I do. I'm just the cheap and dirty, get it done, interested in production, get it done quick, get it out of here. And for the level that we go in fabrication, if I was to take all my welds to this level, I'd still be doing probably the first frame rail on the Challenger. So I'm not interested in going that far with it. Good enough is good enough. Half the stuff gets covered with seam sealer anyway, so who cares? But that's my philosophy. That's what I do, and thanks for watching. Again, drop those questions and comments down there. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do that as well. We're on the Face thing. Instant Grandma loves us / my car shop. You're here on the U thing, so hope you're enjoying the channel. And yeah, there's a lot here. We're approaching 300 videos now on the channel. We're at 270 something, I think. And we're approaching our 1,000 subs. So if you've enjoyed this and you know people who might enjoy it, please spread the word. I would love to get over that 1,000 mark here real soon. And you guys are the ones that are making that happen, so I appreciate it. All right, that's going to do it. There's one more important thing to remember around this place, but it applies to every area of life. Don't forget it. It's important.
Weld.